The giant gas planet below did not have a name that rolled off the tongue, so the locals of Kestrel Spindle just called it the Bruise. It was a colossal sphere of suffocating gravity dominated by slow-churning cyclonic storms, in shades of deep indigo and violent violet against a void-black background. It was beautiful in the way a loaded weapon was beautiful, impressive cold, and entirely indifferent to whether you lived or died. Orbiting this silent behemoth was Kestrel Spindle, a space station that had seen its glory days come and go about 40 years ago. It was a rust bucket junction, a tangled mess of docking arms and habitat rings that smelled perpetually of ozone recycled coffee and unwashed flight suits. It was the preferred watering hole for small-time cargo haulers, semi-independent pilots, and a significant population of graying veterans who had once been aces, but now survived on meager pensions and the collective ownership of battered ships. And then there were the Vulpiri. The fox-like alien warriors used the Spindle as a transit hub. They kept to their own sectors, mostly moving with a fluid predatory grace that made the heavy-footed humans look clumsy by comparison. They were a common sight, yet they always felt like tourists in a graveyard. Fred Archer wiped his hands on a rag that was arguably dirtier than his fingers. He was a man in his early 30s who moved with the deliberate caution of someone who expected the floor to give way at any moment. He stood in the cavernous, echoing silence of Hangar Bay 4, looking up at the Rust Wing. She was an ugly ship. There was no other way to say it. She was a snub-nosed cargo hauler, with oversized thrusters and a patchwork hull that looked like a quilt made of titanium and regret. But she was his. "You are making that humming noise again," Fred muttered, reaching out to press his palm against the landing strut. The ship was silent to the ears of anyone else. But Fred had what the old-timers called engine sense. It was not magic. He insisted on that. It was just a hypersensitivity born of paranoia. He could feel the vibrations in the metal, the subtle harmonics of the power core cycling down. "Manifold 3 is loose," he diagnosed, closing his eyes. "I told you to hold it together until we got the replacement gaskets." He patted the metal affectionately. Fred was a mechanic first, a pilot second. He flew because he had to, but he fixed things because he loved them. He preferred the company of solenoids and fuel injectors to people. Machines were honest. If a machine failed, it was physics. If a person failed, it was usually a tragedy. His communicator buzzed, breaking his communion with the ship. He glanced at the wrist display. It was a notification from the station administration regarding his docking fees. He swiped it away. He would pay it when the next contract cleared. Fred's thoughts drifted, as they often did to Cade. Cade was 22 now. The boy was not technically his son, but biology was a technicality Fred had never cared about. He had found Cade as a scrawny, soot-stained orphan on a mining colony orbit, stealing ration bars from Fred's cargo hold. Fred had fed him, then taught him how to hold a wrench, and eventually how to fly. Now Cade was out there carving his own path. He called Fred Old Man, now a teasing nickname that masked the fact that Cade still came to Fred for credits when the rent was due or for advice when a girl broke his heart. "If he flies safe, I have done my job," Fred whispered to the empty hangar. It was his mantra. Cade was his second chance. Fred climbed the ladder into the cockpit of the Rust Wing. The air inside was stale, smelling of old leather and lubricant. He settled into the pilot's seat, the worn cushions molding to his shape. Before he did anything else, before he checked the fuel pressure or the nav computer, Fred performed his ritual. His hand moved to the right side of the canopy frame. There, etched into the reinforced alloy, was a hairline fracture. It was a tiny, jagged scar in the metal, barely visible unless you knew where to look. Fred ran his thumb over the crack. The texture was rough against his skin. Tap. Tap. He knocked on it twice with his knuckle. Instantly, the hangar vanished. Flashback. The screaming of shearing metal. The world spinning uncontrollably. The roar of an engine being pushed past its theoretical limit. The smell of burning hair and electrical fire. "Fred, the stabilizer, pull up." The voice was screaming in his headset. Barnaby, his wingman, his friend. Fred's hands frozen on the yoke, the engine note climbing to a shriek that vibrated in his teeth. He knew the engine was going to blow. He could feel it in the stick. But he had hesitated. He had wanted to push it just 1 second longer to get the data. Boom. The explosion was not a sound. It was a physical force that shattered his world. End flashback. Fred gasped, his hand jerking back from the crack, as if the metal were white-hot. The silence of the hangar bay rushed back in, filling his ears. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. He kept the crack there. He could have buffed it out, filled it with sealant painted over it. But he left it. It was his penance. A reminder that machines had limits, and pushing them cost lives. He owed a life to the universe because of that day. He would not pay that debt by being reckless. "Okay," Fred breathed out, steadying his hands. "Okay. Routine maintenance. Let us see why you are vibrating." He grabbed his diagnostic tablet and slid out of the pilot's chair, crawling under the main console to access the avionics bay. It was a tight squeeze, a tangle of wires and fiber optic cables. He began the standard sweep, checking connections, looking for corrosion. His fingers moved with practiced dexterity, separating bundles of cables to inspect the leads underneath. That was when he saw it. It was tucked away in the shadows behind the primary throttle linkage. A small, matte black box, no larger than a deck of cards. It was not standard equipment. It did not have the manufacturer's stamp of the shipyard, nor did it have the chaotic hand-labeled look of a repair Fred had done himself. It was sleek, professional, and parasitic. Fred frowned. He reached out to touch it but stopped inches away. "Don't touch what you don't know," Barnaby used to say. He pulled his scanner from his belt and ran a passive sweep. The tablet pinged softly. Signal receiver, Class 4 encryption, direct interface with fuel injection and flight control surfaces. Fred felt a cold knot form in his stomach. He knew what this was. He had seen similar devices in news reports about insurance fraud rings in the outer sectors. It was a kill switch, a device designed to receive a signal from a remote source and cut the engines, lock the steering, or dump the fuel. It was designed to make a ship crash and to make it look like a mechanical failure. His first instinct was rage, a hot, blinding flash of anger. Someone had violated his ship. Someone had put a bomb, metaphorically speaking, under his seat. He reached out, his fingers curling into claws, ready to rip the black box out of the wiring harness and smash it against the bulkhead. "Stop." The voice in his head was Barnaby's. "Observe. Record. Don't break the evidence." Fred froze. If he ripped it out now, whoever put it there would know. The device likely had a tamper alarm. If it went offline, the perpetrator would be alerted. Fred retracted his hand. He took a deep breath, forcing his heart rate down. He had to be smart. He had to be a mechanic, not a frightened animal. He brought up the camera on his tablet. He took high-resolution photos of the device from every angle. He recorded the serial number, though it had been partially filed off. He noted the exact position, the wires it was spliced into. Then, he accessed the ship's internal logs, digging deep into the connection history for the last 7 days. There, a subtle power draw at 0300 hours 2 days ago. The hangar log showed no entry, which meant whoever did this had bypass codes, or knew the ship. Fred pushed that thought away. He could not speculate yet. He opened his toolkit and selected a microcutter and a bypass shunt. Very carefully holding his breath, he isolated the wire that fed the command signal from the black box to the engine computer. He did not cut the power to the box. The box stayed on. It would still blink its little green light. It would still receive signals. It would still report to its master that it was online and ready. But he severed the output. He inserted a microscopic shunt that would absorb any command the box sent, preventing it from reaching the ship's computer. If someone pressed the button to kill his ship, the box would scream, "Die," and the shunt would whisper, "No," and the rustwing would keep flying. "Try to kill me now," Fred whispered, a dark grimace crossing his face. He crawled out from under the console, his knees aching. He felt dirty, and not just from the grease. He felt watched. He needed a distraction. He needed to not think about who had the access codes to his ship. That evening, Fred sat in his small living quarters attached to the hangar. It was a cramped room, cluttered with spare parts, technical manuals, and empty cups of tea. The hum of the station's ventilation system was a comforting white noise. He booted up his terminal and logged into DocLink. DocLink was the social circulatory system of Kestrel Spindle. It was part bulletin board, part video sharing platform, and part bragging ground for pilots. Fred needed something mindless. He scrolled past advertisements for cheap thrusters and high-yield bonds. He watched a few clips of flight simulations critiquing the pilot's turns in his head. Too wide. Too much roll. You are wasting fuel. On a whim, he opened his own archive. He found an old video from 3 years ago. It was shaky footage filmed by a drone hovering in the hangar. In the video, a younger, lankier Cade was covered in hydraulic fluid, swearing at a stubborn bolt. Fred walked into the frame, calmly took the wrench from the boy, and tapped the manifold once. The bolt spun loose. Cade looked at the camera with wide eyes and shouted, "Sorcery!" Fred smiled a genuine sad smile. He uploaded the clip with the caption, "Don't try this at home. It takes 20 years of mistakes to know where to tap." He leaned back, sipping his lukewarm tea. A moment later, a notification chimed. New friend request from Jesse of Embertail. Fred blinked. The name was distinctly Vulpiri. Humans usually chose handles like Starkiller 99 or Cargo King. Vulpiri names were always descriptive, hyphenated, and slightly poetic. Below the request was a message. "The way you speak to that engine is similar to how my sisters and I speak to our blades. It is a language of respect." Fred hesitated. He usually ignored requests from strangers. But the comment about respect struck a chord. He clicked, "Accept." Almost immediately, the video call icon flashed. Fred stared at it. "That's aggressive," he muttered. But his curiosity won out. He straightened his collar, ran a hand through his messy brown hair, and tapped the screen. The image resolved high definition and crisp. There were 3 of them. In the center sat Jessie. She was striking. Her fur was a deep, rusty red, contrasting sharply with the sleek, lightweight polymer armor she wore. Her ears were tall and tufted with black twitching slightly, even in the stillness of the video feed. Her eyes were gold-sharp and intensely focused on him. She looked like she could calculate the trajectory of a bullet just by looking at the gun. To her left was Alma. Her fur was paler, a soft cream color mixed with gray. She wore the flowing, multi-layered robes of a Vulpiri healer. Her expression was softer, her eyes a calm, curious green. She was studying Fred as if he were a patient with an interesting cough. On the right was Maddie. She was a blur of motion even while sitting still. Her fur was dark brown, almost black, and she was draped in a utility harness festooned with wires, soldering irons, and devices Fred couldn't identify. She was grinning, revealing sharp white teeth. "You answered," Maddie chirped. Her voice was higher than the others, crackling with energy. "Jesse said you would be too terrified of 3 apex predators calling you at once." "I am currently terrified," Fred deadpanned, leaning into the camera. "I am just hiding it well behind my crushing fatigue." Jesse snorted a sound that was half laugh, half bark. "Honesty, I like that. I am Jesse. This is Alma and the chaotic one is Maddie." "Fred," he replied. "Just Fred." "We saw your video," Alma said, her voice melodic and soothing. "The vibration check. You did not use a scanner. You felt the resonance." "Yeah, well," Fred rubbed the back of his neck. "Scanners lie. Metal does not." "Exactly." Jessie slammed her hand on the table in front of her. "That is what I tell the flight instructors. They rely on the numbers. But combat is rhythm. Flight is rhythm. They talked. It was surprisingly easy. They asked about the Rustwing, treating the old ship with a reverence that most humans never showed. They asked about the crack in his cockpit, which they had spotted in another one of his videos. That, Fred glanced away from the screen. That is a reminder. Of a mistake, Jessie asked. She was blunt. Of a life I owe, Fred corrected quietly. And a limit I crossed. The three sisters went silent for a moment. They looked at each other, a silent communication passing between them, involving subtle shifts of their ears and tails. You have a pilot's soul, Fred, Jessie said, her tone serious. Even if you try to bury it under grease. A new notification popped up on the screen. It was an icon Fred had never seen before, a stylized image of two wings interlocking with a sword. Bond flight request received from Jessie of Embertail. What is this? Fred asked, squinting at the screen. It is a gesture, Jessie said, looking slightly away, her ears flattening a fraction. A sticker of appreciation. For the conversation. Ah, cool sticker. Fred shrugged and clicked accept. On the screen, Maddie's jaw dropped. Alma covered her mouth with her hand, her eyes widening. Jessie looked like she had just swallowed a live grenade. What? Fred asked, confused by their reaction. Nothing, Jessie said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Excellent. We are connected now. We must go. Training. Goodbye, Fred. The screen went black before Fred could say another word. Weird folks, Fred muttered. He was about to close the terminal when another message arrived. This one was a simple text, white letters on a black background. Sender Cade. Hey, old man. When are you running the Sector 7 border route again? I have a friend who needs a package moved. Rush job. Pays double. Fred stared at the message. The warmth from the conversation with the Vulpiri evaporated, replaced by the cold chill he had felt in the hangar. Sector 7 was the route where he had found the black box. The route where the navigation beacons were sparse and the communication relays were spotty. The perfect place for a ship to disappear. Fred typed a reply, his fingers heavy. Not sure. Rustwing is acting up, doing a full overhaul. Might take a week. He hit send. He watched the status indicator. Delivered. Read. He waited. Cade usually replied instantly. He would send a complaining emoji or a joke about Fred being a grandma who drove too slow. The minutes ticked by. The read status burned on the screen. No reply came. Fred turned off the terminal. The silence in his room felt heavier than the gravity of the gas giant below. The next morning, the station was buzzing. The air recyclers seemed to be working overtime to scrub the scent of anticipation from the atmosphere. Fred walked into the hangar complex at 0800 hours, coffee in hand. A digital banner scrolling across the main bulkhead read, Welcome Vulpiri Delegation. Unity Project Initiative. He ignored it. He had work to do. He needed to fabricate a cover for the kill switch wiring, so it looked completely untouched, just in case someone came to inspect it physically. He spent the day deep in the guts of the Rustwing, emerging only when the shift whistle blew. He was covered in grime, tired, but satisfied that his trap was set. As he was wiping his hands, the station's public address system chimed. The voice was the synthetic, overly cheerful tone of the station administrator. Attention personnel. The Unity Project flight rosters have been finalized. The following local pilot is assigned to support the visiting Vulpiri detail for familiarization maneuvers. Fred Archer. Please report to your hangar bay immediately. Fred dropped his rag. Me. He was a cargo hauler. Nobody. Why would they assign him to a diplomatic military delegation? He heard the sound of magnetic boots clamping on the deck plates behind him. A rhythmic, disciplined marching sound. Fred turned around. Standing at the enormous open doors of Hangar Bay 4, framed by the bustling activity of the corridor behind them, were three figures. Jessie stood in the center. She was no longer wearing the casual armor from the video call. She was in full, ceremonial flight gear, a sleek, form-fitting suit of matte gray and crimson, with polished plating on her shoulders and shins. A heavy kinetic rifle was slung across her back, and her helmet was tucked under her arm. To her right, Alma wore a white flight suit with the medical insignia glowing softly on her chest. To her left, Maddie was practically vibrating in a tech suit, covered in pouches, holding a data pad that she was tapping furiously. They marched right up to him. Fred felt incredibly underdressed in his oil-stained coveralls. Fred looked at them, then back at his ship, then back at Jesse. "You," Fred said, pointing a dirty finger. "You are the delegation." Jesse stepped forward. She was tall, towering over him by a good 4 inches. She looked down at him, her golden eyes gleaming with a mixture of amusement and solemn duty. "You accepted the bond flight, Fred?" Jesse said, her voice echoing slightly in the hangar. "You agreed to the pact." "I thought it was a sticker," Fred protested weakly. "It is a binding contract of shared destiny," Alma explained gently, stepping up. "In our culture, once accepted, you are our designated wingman. We fly together. We fight together. If you crash, we are obligated to crash with you." "And if you fix things?" Maddie grinned, popping up from behind Jesse. "We are obligated to hand you the wrench." Fred looked at the 3 of them. Then he turned and looked at the rust wing. He reached out and touched the crack in the cockpit frame. Tap, tap. He felt the cold metal. He felt the weight of the black box hidden beneath the console. He felt the silence of Cade's unanswered text message. He looked back at the alien warriors standing in his hangar, ready to entrust their lives to him, because he had clicked a button he didn't understand. For the first time in years, the crushing weight of his solitude felt a little lighter. "I hope you do not mind getting dirty," Fred said, wiping his hand on his pants and extending it. "Because this ship leaks oil and smells like old socks." Jessie smiled a fierce, predatory grin that was terrifyingly charming. She gripped his forearm in a warrior's clasp, her grip like iron. "We are Vulpiri, Fred," she said. "We do not mind the dirt. We hunt in it." "Welcome aboard," Fred said. Above them, the blue storms of the gas giant swirled in the dark, and the game began. The transition from a solitary existence to hosting a pack of alien warriors was not gradual. It was an invasion swift and absolute. By 0800 hours the next morning, Fred Archer's workshop had ceased to be a place of quiet, mechanical contemplation, and had become a chaotic intersection of 2 very different species. He stood in the doorway of his living quarters, a mug of coffee halfway to his mouth, staring at the transformation of his sanctuary. The small break area next to the main hangar floor, which had previously contained a sagging couch, a grease-stained table, and a pile of vintage engine magazines, now looked like a forward operating base. "Move your feet, mechanic," Maddie chirped, sliding past him with a crate of equipment that looked heavy enough to crush a human spine. She carried it, as if it were filled with pillows. "This is a workshop," Fred said, his voice lacking real authority. "Not an intergalactic dormitory." "Now it is both," Maddie replied, dropping the crate with a thud that rattled Fred's teeth. She spun around her tail, knocking a stack of invoices off a shelf. She did not seem to notice. "I have claimed the spinny chair. It is superior to the static chair." Fred looked at his favorite and only ergonomic stool. Maddie was already seated in it, spinning in slow, hypnotic circles, while calibrating a device that looked like a laser cutter. On the main planning table, where Fred usually laid out his schematics, Jessie had spread out a massive holographic map of the local sector. She was sharpening a long, curved blade with a whetstone, the rhythmic shh, shh sound cutting through the air. Her armor was disassembled in neat piles on the floor, and she wore a simple undersuit that showed off the lean, dangerous muscle of a career soldier. In the corner, Alma had pushed Fred's collection of spare hydraulic pumps aside to create a sterile field. She was arranging jars of bioluminescent herbs and gleaming surgical tools on a magnetic tray. The smell of antiseptic and something earthy, like crushed pine needles, wafted through the air, warring with the permanent scent of oil and ozone. You cannot just set up a field hospital next to a fuel intake, Fred noted, walking over to the coffee machine, only to find Alma had replaced his canister of cheap grounds with a bag of dried leaves. It is not a hospital, Alma corrected gently, not looking up from her work. It is a wellness station. Your biorhythms are atrocious, Fred. You consume too much caffeine and not enough root water. We must optimize you if you are to fly the bond. Fred sighed, realizing he had lost this battle before it had even begun. He poured himself a cup of the root water, which tasted faintly of dirt and mint, and leaned against the bulkhead. About that, Fred said, looking at Jessie. The bond flight. We need to talk about what exactly I agreed to. Jessie stopped sharpening her blade. She looked up, her golden eyes locking onto his. The intensity in them made Fred want to check if his safety belt was fastened. You accepted the request, Jessie said. The icon was clear. 2 wings, 1 sword. I thought it was a cool logo, Fred admitted. Like a band sticker. Maddie let out a sharp barking laugh from the spinning chair. He thought it was a sticker. Oh, ancestors, we are doomed. Jessie did not laugh. She set the blade down with deliberate care. A bond flight request is not a social gesture, Fred. Among the Vulpiri pilots and warriors share a soul link. When a warrior invites a pilot to fly a bond, it is a declaration of absolute trust. It means that in the coming mission, your life is mine and mine is yours. We do not bail out. We do not eject. We land together or we burn together. Fred felt the blood drain from his face. Burn together, right. And, because you are not Vulpiri, Alma added, wiping a scalpel with a cloth. Tradition dictates that the warrior's closest kin must serve as witness and support. That is us. If Jessie falls because of your error, Maddie and I share the shame. If you fall, we share the grief. We are a single unit now. Fred ran a hand through his hair. Listen, I am flattered, really. But you have the wrong guy. I am a mechanic who flies just enough to pay the bills. I am not an ace. I am the guy who fixes the ace's ship after he pushes it too hard. False, Jessie said. She tapped the holographic table. The sector map vanished, replaced by a video feed. Fred recognized the interface immediately. It was DocLink. I went through your flight logs, Jessie said. Not the ones you post. The ones in the public archive of the flight simulators. On the screen, a simulation played out. It was a scenario known as the Gravity Well Gauntlet, a notorious, impossible scenario designed to test how a pilot handles inevitable death. In the video, a cargo ship was caught in the pull of a collapsing star. The computer's projected survival rate was 0%. But the pilot in the video did not follow the computer's recommended escape vector. Instead of pulling away, the pilot dove into the gravity well, using the shearing forces of the accretion disk to slingshot the ship around a piece of debris and out the other side. The ship in the video shook violently. The structural integrity alarms were screaming, but it made it. That was Cade's final exam, Fred said quietly, staring at the screen. He was failing. The computer had him dead to rights. I jumped into the dual control pod and took the stick. You ignored the navigation computer, Jessie said, stepping closer to him. She smelled of ozone and hot metal. The computer said the hull would shatter. You knew it would not. I felt the stress points, Fred murmured. The simulation has a physics engine. I could feel where the math was loose. I just slipped through the cracks. That is not mechanics, Fred, Jessie said, her voice dropping to a low growl. That is instinct. You heard the machine singing. That is why I sent the request. I do not need a pilot who follows the manual. I need a pilot who can hear the song. Fred looked away. The praise felt like a heavy stone in his gut. You do not understand, he said, his voice tight. In a simulation, if you are wrong, the screen just says, game over. In real life, he involuntarily glanced toward the cockpit of the Rustwing, toward the hairline crack in the frame. In real life, Fred continued. When you ignore the warnings and push the engine because you think you know better, people do not respawn. Metal screams and then it goes silent. The hangar went quiet. Even Maddie stopped spinning. "I am not a hero, Jessie," Fred said, meeting her gaze again. "I am a guy who is scared to death of making another mistake. You do not want your life in my hands." They shake. Jessie studied him for a long moment. Then she reached out and took his hand. Her palm was rough, calloused from years of handling weapons. She did not squeeze. She just held it. "A hand that does not shake has no respect for the danger," she said softly. "I trust the fear, Fred. It keeps you sharp." Before Fred could respond, the sound of the hangar bay doors cycling open broke the tension. "Freddy, are you in there?" The door code has changed again. It was Reuben. Fred pulled his hand away, clearing his throat. "Over here, Reuben. The lock sticks." Reuben shuffled into the workshop. He was a man carved from old leather and nostalgia. At nearly 80 years old, he was one of the oldest residents on Kestrel Spindle. He walked with a cane made from a repurposed control rod, and his flight jacket was covered in patches from squadrons that had not existed for half a century. He stopped when he saw the 3 Vulpiri women. His cloudy eyes widened. "Well, well," Reuben chuckled, his voice rasping like sandpaper. "I heard you had guests, Fred, but I did not think you were hosting a royal court." "Just friends, Reuben," Fred said, pulling up a crate for the old man to sit on. "Jessie, Alma, Maddie, this is Reuben. He flew the Indigo Run before I was born." "The Indigo Run," Jessie repeated, nodding with respect. "To cross the storm belt requires courage." "Requires stupidity," Reuben wheezed, sitting down heavily. "And a ship that does not know it is supposed to explode." "Fred, my boy, I brought the papers." Reuben fished a thick envelope out of his jacket pocket. It was crumpled and stained with coffee rings. "The renewal forms for the Starhopper," Reuben explained. "And the pension adjustment stuff. My eyes are not what they used to be. The print is so small these days they must be using lasers to write it. I was hoping you could take a look, make sure I am not signing away my kidney." "Of course," Fred said. He usually looked over Reuben's paperwork. The station bureaucracy was a nightmare, and many of the older pilots found it impossible to navigate. "I can assist," Alma said, stepping forward. She wiped her hands on a towel. "I am fluent in bureaucratic obfuscation. It is a necessary skill for a healer. Insurance companies are the true enemy, not the wounds." Fred handed the envelope to Alma. "She is better at reading the fine print than I am, Reuben. She found a clause in my rental agreement last night that I did not even know existed." Reuben smiled toothlessly. "Whatever you say, Fred. I trust you. And young Cade. You two are the only reason I still have a roof over my head." At the mention of Cade, Fred felt a flicker of tension. "Cade helps you with paperwork, too." "Oh, yes," Reuben said, accepting a cup of tea from Maddie, who looked delighted to be serving him. "Sharp lad. He handles the digital filings for most of us old birds now. Last month he got me a rebate on my docking fees. Said it was a loyalty bonus or something." Alma had spread the documents out on the table next to Jessie's map. Her green eyes scanned the pages with rapid precision. "This is a standard asset maintenance agreement," Alma murmured. "And this is a pension disbursement form. But—" She stopped. Her ears swiveled forward. She picked up a document from the bottom of the stack. It was a dense block of text, the kind designed to make eyes glaze over. "Reuben," Alma said, her voice sharpening. "Do you recall signing a conditional asset liquidation power of attorney?" Reuben blinked. "What now? I signed a paper to let Cade update the software on my nav computer." "Is that it?" Alma looked at Fred. "Fred, come here." Fred walked over to the table. Alma pointed a slender finger at paragraph 42, subsection C. In the event of pilot incapacitation or a navigational accident resulting in vessel recovery, the designated proxy is authorized to liquidate remaining assets to cover outstanding station liabilities. The designated beneficiary of the residual value is hereby named as Cade Miller." "That is odd," Fred said, frowning. "Cade is the beneficiary, usually that goes to the station or next of kin." "Read the witness line," Alma said quietly. Fred looked down. There at the bottom of the page was a digital signature, witnessed and verified by Fred Archer. Fred stared at his own name. He stared at the unique biometric hash code next to it. It was his signature. It was the exact loop of the F and the sharp strike of the A. But he had never seen this document before in his life. "I did not sign this," Fred whispered. "The biometric stamp is authentic," Maddie said, leaning over his shoulder, her goggles magnifying her eyes. "But, looking at the pixel density, it was copied. Someone took your signature from another file, maybe a safety inspection log, and pasted it here. It is a forgery, but a very high-level one. The station automated systems would never catch it." Fred felt the room tilt. Reuben was sipping his tea, oblivious. "Is everything all right? Did I miss a checkbox?" "It is fine, Reuben," Fred said, his voice sounding hollow to his own ears. "Just some new formatting. We will sort it out." He looked at Alma. Her expression was grave. She understood. If Reuben had an accident, Cade would get everything. The ship, the pension, the savings. And Fred's name was on the paper authorizing it. "He helps a lot of the older pilots," Fred said, the words tasting like ash. "Reuben, how many others does Cade help?" "Oh, a dozen or so," Reuben said proudly. "Old Martha, One-Eyed Jack, the Chen brothers wait. No, not Chen the Smith brothers. Good lad that Cade. Learned from the best." He pointed his cane at Fred. "Learned from you." Fred felt like he was going to be sick. 2 hours later, after Reuben had left, the atmosphere in the workshop was suffocating. Fred was pacing. He walked from the workbench to the ship, touched the landing gear, walked back and repeated the cycle. "It is circumstantial," Fred said, arguing with the air. "Cade is reckless with money. Maybe he just put his name down to make it easier to help them if something happens. He would not." "He forged your signature, Fred," Jessie said. She was leaning against the wall, arms crossed. "That is not helping. That is preparation." "You do not know him," Fred snapped. "I raised him. I taught him right from wrong. He calls me Dad when he is drunk. He is not a monster." "Desperation makes monsters of us all," Alma said softly. The sound of the outer door keypad beeping made them all freeze. The heavy door slid open. "Hey, old man, I heard you got assigned the Cade," froze in the doorway. He was a handsome kid with the same messy hair as Fred and a charming crooked smile that usually got him out of trouble. But the smile faltered when he saw the 3 Vulpiri warriors staring at him. Jessie looked like she was calculating the most efficient way to break his legs. Maddie was glaring. Alma was just watching, sad and observant. "Whoa," Cade said, letting out a nervous laugh. "You did not say it was a crowded house. 4 roommates. That is a fire hazard, isn't it?" "Cade," Fred said. He forced his voice to be steady. He forced his face to be the mask of the grumpy, tired mechanic Cade expected. "What brings you by?" Cade walked in, but he stayed close to the door. His eyes darted around the room, landing on the table where Reuben's papers had been now safely hidden, then moving to the rust wing. "Just checking in," Cade said, shoving his hands into his pockets. "You did not answer my text about the Sector 7 run. I have that client breathing down my neck. They need a pilot who knows the blind spots." "I told you," Fred said, picking up a wrench and wiping it unnecessarily. "Ship is undergoing maintenance. The manifolds are shot." Right, Cade said. He shifted his weight. "So, have you run diagnostics? Anything weird pop up?" The question hung in the air. Jessie's ears twitched. "Weird?" Fred asked, not looking up. "Like what?" "I don't know," Cade stammered. "Gremlins in the system, software glitches. You know how old Rustwing gets. Just wondering if the connection is stable." He was fishing. He wanted to know if the kill switch was active. He wanted to know if Fred had found it. She is purring like a kitten, Fred lied. Just mechanical wear and tear. Why you want to fly her? Cade's eyes widened slightly. Me no. No way. She is your ship. I have my own rig now, remember the Comet. She is fast. Expensive, too, Fred said. How are the payments coming on that? Cade flinched. It was a microscopic reaction, but Fred saw it. Fine. Great. Business is booming, Cade said too loudly. Look, if you cannot take the job, I will find someone else. Just thought I would throw a bone to the old man. He backed toward the door. I gotta run. Meeting a contact. Good luck with the zoo. He gestured vaguely at the Vulpiri sisters and hurried out. The door hissed shut behind him. He is terrified, Jessie said immediately. I could smell the cortisol coming off him. He asked about the connection, Maddie added. He meant the box. Fred dropped the wrench. It clattered loudly on the concrete floor. Show me the box again, Fred said. His voice was cold. They gathered under the cockpit console of the Rustwing. It was cramped. Fred was on his back. Maddie was squeezed in beside him, and Jessie and Alma were watching from the hatch. Fred shone his light on the black box. It blinked innocently. A slow, rhythmic green pulse. Maddie, Fred said. Tell me exactly what this does. Maddie adjusted her goggles. She pulled a slender probe from her belt and touched it to the casing of the device. It is a spectral transceiver, Maddie said, her voice dropping the playful tone she usually used. It is not just a kill switch. It is a puppet master. It intercepts the signals from your flight stick. When activated, it can override your inputs. You pull up, it pushes down. You cut throttle, it goes full burn. And the log, Fred asked. That is the nasty part, Maddie said. It writes a fake log to the black box. It records your inputs as pilot error. It makes it look like you panicked. Like you flew into the ground on purpose or by mistake. Insurance, Alma murmured from the hatch. If it looks like pilot error, the standard station insurance does not pay out. But the private policy does, Fred finished. The one Reuben signed. The one with the accidental death clause. He closed his eyes. If I die, Fred said, Cade gets the insurance payout on me. If Reuben dies, Cade gets his assets. He is farming us. He is planting seeds in our ships and waiting to harvest the wrecks. Why? Jessie asked. He is your son in spirit. Why would he do this? Money, Fred whispered. He bought that new ship, the Comet. It was too expensive. I told him it was too expensive. He must have borrowed from the wrong people. Sharks. The kind who break fingers first and ask for credits later. Fred opened his eyes. He looked at the blinking green light. It looked like an unblinking eye mocking him. He is desperate, Fred said. He thinks if he sacrifices one of us, maybe me, maybe Reuben, he can pay off the debt and save himself. He thinks he is choosing the lesser evil. He is choosing murder, Jessie said sharply. There is no lesser evil there. Fred reached out. He wanted to crush the box. He wanted to rip it out and scream. But he stopped. Barnaby, he whispered. Who is Barnaby? Maddie asked. My old wingman, Fred said. He died because I didn't listen to the machine. I won't let Cade die because I didn't listen to the truth. He pulled his hand back. Maddie, Fred said. Can you trace the activation signal? If someone sends the command, I can trace the source, Maddie said. But the box has to be live. The shunt you installed blocks the command from reaching the ship, but the box still receives it. Good, Fred said. He slid out from under the console and stood up. He brushed the dust off his coveralls. We are going to fly, Fred announced. You said the ship was down for maintenance, Alma noted. I lied, Fred said. We are going to set a trap. I need to know for sure. I need to see him do it. I need to hear him give the order. He will kill you, Jessie warned. If he activates that box while you are in the air. He will try, Fred corrected. But he does not know I have 3 Vulpiri warriors in my passenger seats. And he does not know that I have disconnected the trigger. He will see the ship launch on the station scanners, Maddie said. He will panic. Exactly, Fred said. Panic makes people sloppy. He turned to the sisters. I am going to send him a message. I am going to tell him I fixed the ship. I am going to tell him I am taking a test flight tomorrow morning. A short hop, out past the safety perimeter. The dead zone, Jesse nodded. Where sensors are weak. The perfect place for an accident. And I am going to ask him to spot for me, Fred said. I will put him in the control tower. I want him to watch. Fred walked over to his terminal. His hands were shaking just a little. Not from fear of the flight, but from the heartbreak of what he was about to do. He was about to hand his son a loaded gun, just to see if he would pull the trigger. He typed the message. To Cade Miracle Fix on the manifold. She is airtight. Going to take her for a spin tomorrow at 0600. Just a loop around the outer beacon. Can you man the dispatch console for me? I trust your eyes more than the station controllers. He hesitated for a second. Then he pressed send. The response came 30 seconds later, from Cade. That is fast. Are you sure she is ready? Fred typed. Only one way to find out. See you on the comms. A pause. A long, agonizing pause, where Fred could almost see Cade weighing his soul against his debt. From Cade, I will be there. Fly safe, Dad. Fred stared at the word Dad. It felt like a knife twisting in his gut. He agreed, Fred said quietly. Jesse walked over and placed a hand on his shoulder. Then we prepare. Tonight we rig this hangar with eyes. Tomorrow we fly. Maddie, Fred said, his voice hardening. I want cameras everywhere. I want a recording of every signal that hits this ship. I want proof that will stand up in court in front of the station council and in front of God. Consider it done, Maddie said, cracking her knuckles. Alma, Fred continued. You stay on the biomonitors. If I start to lose it, if I start to hesitate. I will keep you grounded, Alma promised. Jesse, Fred said, turning to the warrior. I am your co-pilot, Jesse said. I will watch your 6, Fred nodded. He looked at the Rustwing one last time. The old ship looked tired under the harsh hangar lights. Tomorrow, Fred said to the ship, we find out if you are a coffin or a cage. He reached out to the terminal again, but his hand hovered over the screen. He saw the read receipt from Cade. Somewhere on the station in a dark room, Cade was likely making a call to the people who owned his debt. He was telling them that the opportunity had arrived. He was selling his father for credits. Fred turned off the lights in the main workshop, leaving only the soft glow of the instrument panels and the bioluminescent herbs in Alma's corner. Get some sleep, Fred told them. We launch at dawn. He walked into his small room and closed the door. He sat on the edge of his bunk, putting his head in his hands. He did not sleep. He sat there listening to the hum of the station, waiting for the morning that would end his world as he knew it. Outside, the great blue storms of the planet churned in the dark, indifferent to the betrayal unfolding in orbit. The air inside the cockpit of the Rustwing tasted of recycled carbon and imminent betrayal. Fred Archer zipped up his flight suit. It was an old thing, patches of orange fabric fading into a dull rust color that matched his ship. It was tight across the shoulders now, a reminder that he was no longer the skinny kid who had graduated flight school with dreams of being an ace. He was heavier now, burdened by gravity and ghosts. You look like a sausage in a casing, Maddie commented. She was crouched on the floor of the cockpit, her knees pulled up to her chest, surrounded by a spiderweb of bypass cables. She had wedged herself into the small space between the pilot's seat and the avionics bay. It is a classic fit, Fred grunted, checking the seal on his gloves. Are we ready? The trap is set, Maddie chirped, tapping a datapad strapped to her thigh. I have isolated the kill switch signal path. When the command comes in, it will hit my datapad first. I will log the source IP, the timestamp, and the encryption key. Then, I will feed the ship's computer a dummy signal that mimics a catastrophic failure without actually shutting down the engines. The telemetry sent back to the station will show you spinning out of control. In reality, you will still have full stick authority." She grinned, her sharp teeth glinting in the low light of the instrument panel. "If everything blows up and we die in a fireball, at least our data logs will be beautiful. The forensic team will be very impressed." "That is a comfort I will hold on to in the afterlife," Fred said dryly. He looked behind him. In the small jump seat, usually reserved for cargo manifests, Jessie was strapped in. She wore her light combat armor, the polymer plates gleaming softly. Her helmet was on her lap, and her golden eyes were fixed on the back of his head. "Remember," Jessie said, her voice calm and commanding, "the ship is just metal. You are the will. Do not fight the machine, command it." "I know how to fly, Jessie," Fred said, though his hands felt cold. "I know you do," she replied. "I am reminding you to breathe." Alma was seated in the auxiliary engineering station, a cramped alcove to the left. She had her medical kit open and a biomonitor display running on the screen next to her. "Heart rate is elevated to 110 beats per minute," Alma noted, her voice serene. "Cortisol levels are rising. Try to visualize a calm stream, Fred." "I am visualizing my son trying to murder me for insurance money," Fred said, flipping the ignition switches. "It is not exactly a Zen garden." The Rustwing shuddered as the main fusion core woke up. The hum was familiar, a deep baritone vibration that Fred felt in his teeth. He reached out and touched the crack in the canopy frame. Tap, tap. He did it without thinking. It was muscle memory. But this time, the flashback did not come. Instead, he felt a hand on his shoulder. Jessie reached forward and placed her hand over his. "We are here," she said. "You are not alone in the dark this time." Fred took a shaky breath. He nodded. "Control," Fred spoke into the comms headset. "This is Rustwing requesting permission to disconnect from umbilical and proceed to outer marker for systems test." There was a pause. Static hissed in his ear. Then a voice came through. It was familiar. It was the voice that used to ask for bedtime stories. "Copy that, Rustwing," Cade's voice said. It sounded thin, strained. "Umbilical retracting. You are clear for maneuvering. Be careful out there, Fred. The magnetic storms on the lower hemisphere are acting up." "Copy," Fred said. He stared at the audio waveform on his screen. "I will keep an eye on it. Out." Fred gripped the throttle. "Here we go." High above the hangar bays in the sterile blue-lit cylinder of the traffic control tower, Cade Miller sat hunched over his console. The tower was usually a place of quiet efficiency, filled with the murmur of controllers, guiding massive freighters into dock. But today, Cade had arranged for the graveyard shift roster to be thin. He was alone in Sector 4 control. His hands were sweating. He wiped them on his pants, leaving dark streaks on the fabric. On his primary screen, a green dot labeled Rustwing was slowly drifting away from the station's superstructure. Cade looked at the secondary screen. It was a secure channel, text-only encrypted. "Unknown." "Is he clear of the blast shields?" Cade typed, his fingers trembling. "Yes. He is moving to the test zone." "Unknown." "Good. Don't hesitate. The longer he flies, the more chance he has to turn back." "Do it now." Cade stared at the command console. To his right, there was a specific subroutine window open. It was a maintenance override program designed to send diagnostic signals to ships with compatible transponders, or in this case, a kill signal to a black box. "I am doing this for him," Cade whispered to himself. The words felt like gravel in his mouth. "Reuben is too old. Fred is buried in debt. If I don't do this, the collectors will take everything. They will hurt him. This is quick. This is an accident. He won't feel it." He was lying to himself, and he knew it. But the lie was the only thing keeping him from vomiting. "Just an accident," Cade repeated. He watched the green dot cross the yellow line of the safety perimeter. Unknown, do it. Cade squeezed his eyes shut. He reached out and pressed the enter key. The Rustwing was 5 kilometers out from Kestrel Spindle, hanging in the void above the swirling indigo clouds of the gas giant. Systems green, Fred said, scanning the dials. Fuel pressure steady. Hydraulics good. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe he won't. Signal incoming, Maddie shouted from the floor. The cockpit was suddenly bathed in red light. A shrill alarm screamed, cutting through the low hum of the engines. Source confirmed, Maddie yelled over the siren. Traffic Control Dispatch, Console 4 User IDK, Miller. Fred felt his heart stop. It was one thing to suspect. It was another to see the name flashing on the screen in jagged red letters. The ship lurched, not because of the engine, but because the flight computer shouted that it was dying. Simulating compressor stall on Engine 1, Maddie narrated her fingers, flying across her datapad. I am feeding the telemetry back to him. On his screen, you are entering a flat spin. The ship is fighting me, Fred gritted his teeth, wrestling with the yoke. Even though the engine was fine, the black box was trying to inject ghost inputs into the fly-by-wire system. It was telling the thrusters to compensate for a spin that wasn't happening. It is trying to push us starboard, Fred yelled. Towards the interference zone. Let it drift a little, Jesse ordered. Make it look real. Fred eased off the stick. The Rustwing groaned and banked sharply to the right. The artificial gravity compensators whined, and Fred felt his stomach drop. He keyed the radio. He had to play the part. Control. I have a situation here, Fred shouted, injecting real panic into his voice. I have lost Engine 1. She is pulling hard to starboard. I cannot stabilize. Static. Then, Cade's voice. Fred, I see it. Telemetry shows a critical failure in the fuel pump. I am trying to correct, Fred yelled. I am going to cut the main line and restart. No, Cade's voice cracked. No, do not cut the line. The safety protocol says to let the computer auto-stabilize. Just let go of the stick, Fred. Trust the system. Trust the system, Fred, laughed a bitter barking sound. The system is trying to kill me. Just let it drift, Cade pleaded. It will level out. Please, Fred. Just let go. In the cockpit, Jessie looked at Fred. Her face was grim. He is telling you to surrender to the crash. He thinks if I fight it, I might save it, Fred said. He wants the ship to go into the magnetic shear. The sensors go blind there. No black box recovery. Another signal, Maddie warned. He is sending a secondary command. What is it? Alma asked, leaning forward against her straps. It is a purge command, Maddie said, her voice dropping to a whisper. He is trying to dump the atmosphere. He is trying to vent the cockpit. Fred went cold. Cutting the engine was one thing. That was a crash. That was a chance. Venting the air was an execution. Block it, Fred said. His voice was dead. Blocked, Maddie said instantly. I am sending back a valve-jammed error code. But Fred, he just tried to suffocate us. Fred stared at the vast, uncaring storm below. A tear, hot and angry, leaked from his eye and tracked through the grease on his cheek. Okay, Fred whispered. Okay. The radio crackled again. Cade sounded frantic now. Fred, are you there? The sensors are showing erratic readings. Why aren't you leveling out? Fred did not answer. Control! A new voice cut into the secured channel on the ship's end. Maddie had hacked the uplink, so they could hear what Cade was hearing. It was a distorted voice. The loan shark. Why is he still talking? The distorted voice hissed. Vent him. Finish it. I tried. Cade's voice was sobbing now. The valve's stuck. I can't do it. Then crash him. Guide him into the shear. Do it or we come for the old man first. Fred heard it all. Every word. That is enough, Jessie said. Fred, take the stick. The computer is locking me out, Fred said. The black box is fighting the shunt. It is flooding the buffer. Then turn off the computer, Jessie said. Fred looked at her. That is suicide. Without the fly-by-wire, this thing is a brick. You are a mechanic, Jesse said. You know where the lines are. Feel the ship. Do not fly the math. Fly the metal. Fred looked at the panel. He looked at the flashing red lights, the screaming alarms, the lies his son was feeding him. He reached up and grabbed the master breaker for the avionics suite. Going dark, Fred said. He pulled the lever. Snap. The cockpit plunged into darkness. The screens died. The alarms were silenced instantly. The only light came from the blue glow of the planet below and the faint, amber emergency LEDs on Maddie's harness. The control stick went heavy in his hands. It was dead weight. No hydraulic assist, no computer correction. Just cables and pulleys and brute force. The silence was deafening. Now, Fred breathed. He closed his eyes. He didn't look at the horizon line. He didn't look at the altimeter. He felt the vibration of the fusion core through the seat of his pants. He felt the shudder of the starboard wing as it cut through the thin upper atmosphere. He felt the specific rhythmic thrum, thrum, thrum of the fuel pump. The drag is on the left wingtip, the ship whispered to him. The magnetic field is pulling at the nose. Jesse, Fred grunted, straining against the heavy stick. I need you on the co-pilot yoke. We need leverage. On it, Jesse said. She grabbed her stick. Tell me. On 3, Fred said, sweat stinging his eyes. We are going to roll hard left. Into the spin. We are going to use the gravity of the moon to slingshot back. That is against all regulations, Alma noted calmly. It will overstress the airframe by 40%. 50%, Fred corrected. 1, 2, 3. They pulled. The rustwing screamed. It was a sound of tortured metal, a shriek that vibrated through their bones. The ship rolled violently, tumbling through the void. Fred felt the G-forces slam him into his seat. His vision grayed at the edges. Hold it, Fred roared. Hold it together, old girl. He could feel the magnetic shear invisible in the dark. It was like a riptide. If they touched it, the electronics would fry and they would be dead. He navigated by the vibration. When the stick rattled to the left, he pushed right. When the floorboards hummed a high C, he throttled down. He was playing the ship like an instrument. We are dropping too fast, Maddie yelled, looking at her independent altimeter. 3,000 meters to crush depth. I know, Fred shouted. Fred, Jesse's voice was sharp. You are drifting toward the storm wall. I have to, Fred yelled back. It is the only way to shake the tracking lock. For a second, just one terrifying second, Fred hesitated. He looked at the darkness of the storm. It looked peaceful. If I go in there, he thought, it is over. Cade gets the money. The debt dies with me. Reuben keeps his home. I stopped fighting. His grip on the stick loosened. Just a fraction. Let it go, he whispered. I owe a life anyway. No, Jesse's voice was a thunderclap right in his ear. She reached over and grabbed his shoulder, her claws, digging into the fabric of his flight suit, piercing the skin. Do not you dare, Jesse roared. You do not get to use death as an eraser, Fred Archer. You do not get to die to make things easy. That is cowardice. Fred gasped the pain in his shoulder, snapping him back to reality. We need you, Jesse shouted. Reuben needs you. The others need you. If you die, you leave them with a murderer. Is that your legacy? Is that what you owe? Fred's eyes snapped open. The gray fog in his mind cleared. He was not paying a debt. He was enabling a crime. No, Fred growled. No, damn it. He slammed the throttle forward to maximum. Maddie reroute auxiliary power to the structural integrity fields. Alma braced for impact. Bracing. Alma said, curling into a ball. Jesse, pull up now. They hauled back on the sticks with everything they had. The rustwing hit the dense atmosphere layer like a stone skipping on water. Bam! The ship shook so hard. A panel blew off the ceiling, showering sparks over Alma. The hull groaned a deep, mournful sound of twisting titanium. But it held. The nose lifted. The blue clouds fell away. The stars spun back into view. They shot upwards, riding a gravity wave, tearing away from the planet's grip and back toward the station. Fred gasped for air, his lungs burning. His arms were trembling so hard he could barely hold the stick. "Status," he croaked. "We are alive," Maddie whispered. She sounded stunned. "Hull integrity at 60%, but we are flying." "Logs?" Fred asked. "Secured," Maddie said. "I have everything. The activation signal, the purge command, the audio. I have the IP trace leading straight to Cade's terminal." Fred slumped in his seat. He flipped the avionics breaker back on. The screens flickered to life. "Cade," Fred said. He didn't key the radio yet. He just said the name. In the control tower, Cade was staring at his screen in horror. The telemetry had shown the Rustwing dropping. The altitude had plummeted. He had seen the flat line. He had started to cry. He had put his head in his hands, shaking with the sobbing racks of a man who had just killed his father. But then, the dot reappeared. It blinked back onto the radar, rising, fast, impossible speed. "No," Cade whispered. "No, he crashed. He has to be crashed." The voice in his earpiece, the loan shark, was screaming. Unknown. "You idiot! He is still airborne. He is coming back. What did you do?" "I don't know," Cade yelled at the screen. "I sent the code. The system said confirmed, unknown. You failed. You missed. Now he brings the ship back and the black box will be inspected. You are a liability." "Wait," Cade pleaded. "I can fix it, I can." Click. The line went dead. The encrypted chat window vanished, deleted by a remote wipe command. Cade was alone. He looked at the radar. The Rustwing was on an intercept course for the station. It was flying steady. It was coming for him. Panic cold and sharp seized him. He fumbled with the console. "Fred," Cade's voice trembled into the microphone. "Fred, are you copy? Silence. Fred, please. The sensors said you went down. I thought, oh God, I thought the system failed." He was still trying to lie. He was trying to salvage the narrative. Then Fred's voice came through the speaker. It was not the voice of the gentle mechanic who had raised him. It was the voice of a stranger. It was the voice of the void. "I am alive, Cade." Cade flinched, as if he had been struck. "The system," Cade stammered. "Something went wrong. The navigation, it gave you bad data. I tried to warn you." "Save it," Fred said. The transmission was crystal clear. "I have the box, Cade. I have the logs. I heard you." Cade froze. "Have you heard what—" "I heard you try to vent my cockpit," Fred said. "I heard you choose the money." Cade fell back into his chair. The world was spinning. He looked at the door of the control tower. He wanted to run, but where the station was a closed loop. There was nowhere to go. "Fred," Cade wept. "Fred, listen. They made me. They were going to kill me. You do not understand." "I understand numbers," Fred said. "I understand that 5,000 credits was the price of my air." No, it wasn't like that. Please, Dad. I need to explain. Just don't go to the authorities yet, please." There was a long silence on the radio. Cade held his breath. "Fred, meet me," Fred said. "In the workshop, alone, 1 hour." "Okay," Cade sobbed. "Okay, just us. I will explain everything. We can fix this." 1 hour, Fred repeated. The link cut. On the Rustwing, Fred took off his headset and hung it on the yoke. He looked back at the 3 women. Jessie was unbuckling her harness. She looked fierce, her fur slightly bristled, but her eyes were filled with a deep, sorrowful pride. Alma was checking a cut on her forehead where the panel had hit her. Maddie was hugging her datapad like a teddy bear. "You are going to meet him?" Jessie asked. "I have to," Fred said. "I need to look him in the eye. I need to know if there is anything left of the boy I raised." "He is dangerous," Jessie said. "A trapped animal bites." "I know," Fred said. "That is why I am not going alone." Not really. He looked at Maddie. You said you have cameras in the workshop. Hidden in the tool racks, under the floor grates, inside the ventilation ducts. Maddie nodded. High definition, audio and visual. Good, Fred said. Turn them all on, and get a direct link to station security. Find that Officer Yara. Tell her to be ready. You are turning him in, Alma said softly. It was not a question. Fred looked out the viewport at the approaching lights of Kestrel Spindle. It looked like home, but it felt like a cage. I am not turning him in, Fred said, his voice cracking slightly. I am stopping him, before he succeeds in killing someone who cannot fly their way out of it. He turned the ship towards the docking bay. Get ready, Fred said. We have a landing to stick. The Rustwing glided into the hangar bay, battered, scarred, leaking hydraulic fluid, but unbroken. It settled onto the landing struts with a heavy metallic sigh. Fred sat in the pilot's seat for a moment longer, his hands resting on the controls. He felt the vibration of the ship die down as the fusion core cycled into standby. He touched the crack in the frame one last time. Tap, tap. We made it, Barnaby, he whispered. We made it. He unbuckled his harness and stood up. Let us go, he said to the sisters. We have a trial to prepare for. The hangar bay 4 felt different now. It was no longer the sanctuary of Greece and quiet contemplation it had been just 24 hours ago. It felt like a stage set for a tragedy, the air thick with the invisible dust of impending ruin. The Rustwing sat cooling in the center of the bay, the heat shimmering off her thrusters in visible waves. To the casual observer, she looked like she had just returned from a standard, if somewhat rough, test flight. But to Fred Archer, she looked like a crime scene. Camera 1 is live, Maddie whispered. Her voice was uncharacteristically hushed, lacking its usual chaotic bounce. She was kneeling by the main tool rack, her fingers deftly wiring a microscopic lens into the hollow of a socket wrench holder. It was invisible to the naked eye. Camera 2 is behind the hydraulic lift, Jessie reported. She was moving with the silent, fluid grace of a predator checking angles. It covers the entrance and the primary seating area. There are no blind spots. Fred stood by the workbench, wiping his hands on a rag. His hands were clean, but he could not stop scrubbing them. He felt a phantom layer of grime on his skin, the kind that soap and water could not reach. It was the grime of complicity. Audio is clear, Maddie continued, tapping her datapad. I have set up a directional microphone under the console table. It will pick up a whisper from 10 meters away. Everything he says will be recorded on 3 separate redundant drives, encrypted and uploaded to the station cloud in real time. Good, Fred said. His voice sounded flat, like a piece of sheet metal, struck by a dead-blow hammer. Alma stood near the communications terminal in the corner. She was speaking in low, rapid tones into her headset. Yes, Officer Yara. We have secured the premises. The subject is expected to arrive within 10 minutes. We are not detaining him physically. We are waiting for a voluntary confession. Yes, I understand the risk. We have a warrior present for containment if necessary. She cut the connection and looked at Fred. Her green eyes were filled with a profound sadness. Security is holding position in the corridor, Alma said softly. Officer Yara and her team are listening to our feed. When and if he admits to the crime, or if he becomes violent, I will trigger the signal. They will breach the door. He won't get violent, Fred said, staring at the door. He is not a fighter. He is just lost. A drowning man will climb on top of his rescuer to breathe, Jessie warned, stepping out of the shadows. She had removed her heavy armor, wearing only her flight undersuit, but her posture was coiled steel. Do not underestimate the violence of a coward, Fred. Fred looked at the 3 of them. They were strangers he had met on the internet days ago, yet here they were turning his workshop into a fortress of truth. Hide, Fred said. If he sees you, he will clam up. He needs to think it is just me, just his old man. "We will be behind the partition wall," Jesse said. "We will be watching. If he makes a move towards a weapon, I will be across the room before his heart beats twice." "Just let me talk to him first," Fred said. "I need to hear him say it." The three Vulpiri sisters nodded. Silent as smoke, they slipped behind the heavy canvas partition that separated the sleeping quarters from the main work floor. Fred was alone. He pulled up 2 chairs. He placed them facing each other a meter apart. It looked intimate. It looked like a father and son preparing for a chat about life, or an executioner offering a final cigarette. He waited. The station clock on the wall ticked. Tick, tick, tick. At exactly 0900 hours, the door chime rang. Fred did not move to open it. He hit the release button on his desk. The heavy blast doors hissed open. Cade stood there. He looked terrible. His flight suit was rumpled, stained with sweat at the collar. His hair, usually styled with arrogant precision, was a mess. But it was his eyes that gave him away. They were sunken, rimmed with red, darting around the room like trapped birds. He saw Fred sitting there. He forced a smile. It was a ghastly thing, a rictus of muscle that did not reach his eyes. "Hey," Cade said. His voice cracked. He cleared his throat. "Hey, old man. You made it back. I saw the logs. Great landing." "Come in, Cade," Fred said. He did not stand up. He kept his hands on his knees, visible and still. Cade stepped inside. The door hissed shut behind him, sealing them in. "So," Cade said, shuffling towards the chairs, but stopping to lean against a stack of crates. He was trying to look casual, but his body language was all wrong. He was vibrating with nervous energy. "The system was crazy, right? Must have been a solar flare hitting the sensors. Or maybe a bug in the update patch. I told maintenance to check the grid." "Sit down, Cade," Fred said. "I can't stay long," Cade said, checking his wrist chrono. "I have a thing, a client." "Sit down." The command was not loud, but it had the weight of an anchor. Cade flinched. He walked over to the chair Fred had placed and sat on the edge of it, ready to bolt. "You are acting weird, Fred," Cade said, laughing nervously. "You look like you saw a ghost." "I did," Fred said. "I saw my own ghost out there, Cade. 5 kilometers out, spinning towards the storm wall." "Yeah, well, like I said, glitches happen," Cade said, wiping his palms on his knees. "The important thing is you are safe. We can file a report, get the insurance to cover the inspection." "Stop," Fred said. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, matte black device. He set it gently on the crate between them. It was the kill switch. Cade stopped breathing. His eyes locked onto the black box. His face went the color of old ash. "What is that?" Cade whispered. "You know what it is," Fred said calmly. "I found it 3 days ago. I disabled it. I bypassed the signal. That is why I am alive. That is why the Rustwing did not vent its atmosphere when you sent the command." "I didn't," Cade stammered. "I don't know what you are talking about. That looks like a standard transponder booster. The station installed those last month on all Class C haulers." "Don't lie to me, Cade," Fred said. His voice was gentle, which made it worse. "I have the logs. I have the IP trace. I recorded the voice on the other end of your line. I heard him tell you to finish it. I heard you try to argue, and then I heard you try to kill me." Cade stood up, knocking the chair over. "It's a mistake," Cade yelled, his voice rising to a shrill pitch. "You are confused. The oxygen deprivation, maybe you hallucinated." Fred stood up slowly. He picked up a tablet from the workbench. He tapped the screen and turned it towards Cade. It was a graph, a timeline of signal inputs. 0615 hours, Fred read. "Command sent, pitch override. Source dispatch, console 4. User Cade Miller. 0618 hours. Command sent, cockpit depressurization. Source dispatch, console 4. User Cade Miller." Fred lowered the tablet. "Why Cade?" Cade stared at the screen. The evidence was absolute. There was no room for denial, no corner to hide in. The facade of the innocent, confused pilot crumbled, revealing the terrified child beneath. "I didn't have a choice," Cade screamed. He paced frantically, running his hands through his hair. "They were going to kill me, Fred. You don't know these people. They are not like the station security. They don't arrest you. They take you to the airlock and they open the outer door 1 inch at a time." "Who?" Fred asked. "The lenders," Cade shouted. "The Shadow Syndicate. I needed the money for the Comet. I thought I could make the payments. I had a run lined up, a big one, smuggling ore to the outer rim. But the deal fell through. The cargo was seized. I lost everything." "So you borrowed more," Fred said. "I had to cover the interest," Cade pleaded. "It spiraled. It got out of control. 200,000 credits, Fred. 200,000. They said they would break my legs. Then they said they would come for you. They knew where you lived. They knew about the Rustwing." "So you decided to save them the trouble," Fred said coldly. "You decided to do the job for them." "No, it wasn't like that." Cade moved towards him, his hands out, begging. "The guy, the broker, he gave me a way out. He said if there was an accident, a clean accident, the insurance would pay out. He said he could wipe the debt if I gave him the claim number." "My life for your debt," Fred said. It was supposed to be quick. Cade was crying now, tears streaming down his face. "You weren't supposed to know, it was just supposed to happen. The ship goes down, you don't feel a thing. And then it's over. No more debt. No more threat. And Reuben," Fred stiffened. "What about Reuben?" Cade wiped his nose on his sleeve. He looked down at the floor. "They needed collateral," Cade whispered. "For the bigger loans. My ship wasn't enough." Fred walked over to the workbench. He picked up a stack of papers, the copies Alma had printed out. He threw them on the floor at Cade's feet. "Pick them up," Fred commanded. Cade looked at the papers. He didn't move. "Pick them up," Fred roared. The sound echoed off the metal walls, making Cade jump. Cade bent down and retrieved the papers with trembling hands. "Power of attorney," Fred said. "Asset liquidation authorization. Beneficiary transfer." "I just helped them with the filing," Cade mumbled. "You forged my signature," Fred shouted, stepping into Cade's space. "You took my biometric scan from the old training files, and you pasted it onto these documents. You made me the witness to your theft. You stole from Reuben. You stole from the Smith brothers. You stole from every old pilot who trusted you to read their mail because their eyes are too tired." "I was going to pay them back," Cade yelled back. "Once the business took off, I was going to give them double. I was protecting them." "Protecting them?" Fred looked at him with disgust. "You signed a paper that said if Reuben had an accident, you get his pension. You get his ship. Were you planning to crash him too?" Cade was Reuben, next on the list after me. Cade collapsed. He fell to his knees, clutching the papers to his chest, sobbing uncontrollably. "I don't know. I don't know what I was going to do. I was just trying to survive." "Survival," Fred repeated. He crouched down so he was eye level with Cade. "You think this is survival? Selling out the people who fed you? The people who taught you to fly? You don't understand what it's like." Cade looked up, his eyes wild. "You are happy being a mechanic. You are happy being poor. I wanted more. I wanted to be someone. And then I was in a hole, and it was so deep, and I couldn't climb out." "You could have asked for help," Fred said softly. "You could have come to me." "And told you what?" Cade spat. "That I am a failure. That the golden boy you bragged about is a fraud. That I owe more money than you have made in your entire life." Cade's voice broke. "I couldn't stand it, Fred. I couldn't stand seeing you look at me with disappointment. I would rather you be dead than look at me and know I failed you." The words hung in the air, heavy and poisonous. Fred stared at him. He felt a pain in his chest that had nothing to do with the physical stress of the flight. It was the sound of a heart breaking. "So you killed me in your head," Fred said quietly. "To save your pride." "To save us," Cade insisted, grasping at straws. "If the insurance paid out, I could have fixed up the station. I could have bought Reuben a better unit. I could have... Stop, Fred said. He stood up and turned his back on Cade. Just stop. Fred, please, Cade said, trying to stand up. We can fix this. You have the box. We can destroy it. We can say it was a misunderstanding. I will work it off. I will pay you back. Just don't call security. If they find out I am dead, the syndicate will kill me in prison. You are not going to prison for the syndicate, Fred said. You are going to prison for attempted murder. And for fraud. Fred, I am your son, Cade screamed. Practically you raised me. You can't throw me away. Fred turned around. His face was a mask of sorrow. I am not throwing you away, Cade. I am stopping you from falling further. Cade's face twisted into something ugly. Panic replaced the sorrow. He looked at the door. It was locked. He looked at Fred. Fred was older, slower. I can't let you do that, Cade said. His voice dropped. He reached for the heavy wrench sitting on the crate. It happened in a blur. Before Cade's fingers could touch the cold steel of the tool, a shadow detached itself from the wall. Jessie was there. She didn't strike him. She simply materialized between Cade and the wrench. She grabbed Cade's wrist. She didn't twist it. She just held it. Her grip was absolute. Cade gasped, looking up at the 7-foot-tall Vulpiri warrior. Do not, Jessie said. Her voice was a low growl, vibrating with lethal promise. Do not add assault on a warrior to your list of crimes, little bird. Maddie and Alma stepped out from behind the partition. Maddie held a camera. Alma held a datapad. We have it all, Maddie said, her voice shaking slightly. She looked disappointed. She had liked Cade. Every word, every confession. Cade looked at them. He looked at the camera. He looked at Fred. He realized then that he had walked into a trap. He realized that the glitch was a setup. You, Cade looked at Fred with betrayal in his eyes. You set me up. You wore a wire. I did what I had to do, Fred said. To survive, Alma tapped her headset. Officer Yara, now. The blast doors hissed open. Officer Yara, a stern woman with graying hair and a no-nonsense uniform, walked in. Behind her were 2 station security guards armed with stun batons. Cade wilted. The fight went out of him like air from a punctured tire. He slumped against the crate, Jessie still holding his wrist. Cade Miller, Yara said, her voice echoing in the silent hangar. You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, financial fraud, identity theft, and endangerment of station integrity. Jessie released his wrist. Cade let his arm drop. The guards moved in. They pulled Cade's arms behind his back. The sound of the magnetic cuffs locking was loud and final. Click thud. You have the right to remain silent, Yara recited. Though given the broadcast we just recorded, I suggest you start saving your voice for your lawyer. They hauled him up. Cade stumbled. He looked small between the guards. He turned his head to look at Fred. Fred, Cade whispered. Dad. I am sorry. Fred stood still. He wanted to go to him. He wanted to hug him. He wanted to punch him. He did none of those things. I know, Fred said. His voice was barely audible. I know you are. The guards marched Cade out. Yara paused at the door. She looked at Fred and nodded respectfully. We will need your formal statement within the hour, Mr. Archer. And the data drives. They are ready, Maddie said, handing over a sealed drive. Chain of custody is encrypted. Yara took the drive and left. The doors closed. The silence that followed was suffocating. Fred stood in the middle of the room, staring at the spot where Cade had knelt. The papers were still scattered on the floor. He called me Dad, Fred whispered. He felt his knees give way. He didn't hit the floor. Jessie was there catching him. She lowered him gently onto the crate. Breathe, Jessie said. It is done. I failed him, Fred said, putting his head in his hands. I watched him drown and I didn't see it. I was so busy looking at my own feet, looking at my own guilt over Barnaby, that I didn't see my son turning into a criminal. You did not make his choices, Fred, Alma said, kneeling beside him. She placed a hand on his arm. Her touch was warm. He is a man. He chose the debt. He chose the lie. You chose to stop him before he took a life. That is not failure. That is mercy. It feels like failure, Fred choked out. The news traveled through Kestrel Spindle faster than a neutrino burst. By noon, everyone knew. Reuben came to the hangar. He didn't bring his cane this time. He was supported by two other old pilots, the Smith brothers. They walked in, while Fred was sitting on the floor, staring at the rust wing. "Is it true?" Reuben asked. His voice was trembling. "Is it true about the papers about Cade?" Fred looked up. He couldn't lie to Reuben. Not anymore. "Yes," Fred said. "He was selling us out, Reuben. He was betting on us dying." Reuben closed his eyes. He swayed and the Smith brothers held him up. "I trusted that boy," Reuben whispered. "I gave him candy when he was knee-high. I taught him how to read a star chart." "He was desperate," Fred said, feeling the need to defend Cade even now. "He owed bad people a lot of money." "We all owe money," one of the Smith brothers barked. "I owe the dockmaster 3 months of fees. I don't go trying to kill my neighbors." "He is right," Reuben said. He opened his eyes. They were wet. "There is no excuse for this, Fred. None." Reuben looked at Fred. He looked at the exhaustion etched into the younger man's face. "You caught him," Reuben said. "You stopped him. You saved my ship. You saved my pension." "I signed the papers, Reuben," Fred said miserably. "Even if it was forged, it was my name." "And it was your courage that exposed it," Reuben said. He shuffled forward and placed a shaking hand on Fred's head. "Do not carry his sin, son. You have enough of your own." They stayed for a while, lamenting the loss of innocence, the rot that had spread in their small community. Then they left, looking older and more fragile than before. Night fell over Kestrel Spindle. The station lights dimmed to the nocturnal cycle. Fred was alone in the hangar again. The sisters had retreated to the living quarters to give him space, but they were close. He could hear them moving around, the soft murmur of their voices. He stood by the rust wing. He ran his hand along the fuselage. He stopped at the cockpit frame. The crack was there, the jagged line in the metal. For years, he had touched it to remind himself of his limits, to remind himself that he was dangerous. Now it just looked like a crack, a structural flaw, something that needed to be fixed. "It wasn't just speed, was it?" Fred whispered to the ghost of Barnaby. He thought about the kill switch, the specific model, the way it overrode the inputs. A memory surfaced. A detail from the accident investigation 10 years ago. The investigators had found a foreign component in the wreckage of Barnaby's ship. They had dismissed it as debris from another vessel. But what if it wasn't? What if Barnaby hadn't just made a mistake? What if someone had bet against them back then too? The thought made Fred cold. It also made him angry. A clean, sharp anger that burned away the fog of guilt. He was not just a victim of bad luck. He was a survivor of a system that ate pilots and spat out money. The door to the living quarters opened. Jessie walked in. She carried 2 mugs. She didn't say anything. She just walked over and handed one to Fred. "Tea," she said. "Alma's blend. It tastes like tree bark, but it helps the nerves." Fred took the mug. "Thank you." Jessie leaned against the ship beside him. Her shoulder brushed his arm. It was a solid, grounding presence. "Yara called," Jessie said. "Cade is talking. He is giving up names. The syndicate contacts. The brokers. He is burning the whole network down to try and get a reduced sentence." "Good," Fred said. "And," Jessie continued, "she found something else, in the old files, triggered by your statement about the device." Fred looked at her. "The accident," Jessie said softly. "The one with Barnaby." Yara pulled the archive evidence photos. The debris they found matches the serial number prefix of the device Cade used. It was an older model, but the same make. Fred squeezed the mug until his knuckles turned white. "It wasn't me," Fred whispered. "I mean, I pushed the engine. But the lock, the reason the stick froze." "It was sabotage," Jesse said. "You were being farmed, Fred. Just like Cade tried to farm you." Fred let out a breath he felt like he had been holding for a decade. The crushing weight on his chest, the absolute certainty that he was a killer, cracked and fell away. He wasn't a killer. He was a witness. "I need to testify," Fred said. His voice was strong now. "Not just against Cade. Against all of them. The lenders. The station oversight. The whole damn system." "We know," Jesse said. "That is why we are here." Alma and Maddie came out of the room. Maddie was holding a portable light, turning the dial down to a warm amber glow. Alma carried a blanket. "The hearing is set for 2 days from now," Alma said. "It will be a tribunal. The elders, the station admin, and the Vulpiri trade representative." "You are going to be the star witness," Maddie grinned, though her smile was gentle. "We will make sure your suit is clean." Fred looked at them. 3 aliens who had dropped into his life and saved him from a death spiral he hadn't even known he was in. "Why?" Fred asked. "Why stay?" "You could have left when the danger started. This isn't your fight." Jessie pushed off the ship and stood in front of him. She reached out and tapped the spot over his heart. "You accepted the bond flight," Jessie said. "We share a cockpit. That means we share the turbulence." "And besides," Maddie added, hopping onto a crate, "you make terrible coffee. Someone has to save you from that." Fred smiled. It was a small, tired smile, but it was real. "Okay," Fred said. "Okay." He looked at the crack in the rust wing one last time. "Maddie," Fred said. "Tomorrow, can we fix this crack? I think I am done with it." Maddie beamed. "I have the perfect sealant. It cures in 4 hours. It will be stronger than the original alloy." "Good," Fred said. "Let us fix it." Outside the hangar, the great blue planet turned in the dark. The storms were still there, violent and indifferent. But inside, under the warm amber light, the storm had passed. Fred sipped his tea. It tasted like tree bark. It tasted like hope. The great hall of Kestrel Spindle was usually reserved for trade negotiations and the annual station anniversary ball. Today, however, it smelled of stale coffee anxiety and the dry, dusty scent of legal flimsies. The tribunal was in session. Fred Archer sat in the witness box. It was a lonely chair elevated slightly above the floor, designed to make the occupant feel small and exposed. He wore his best flight suit, clean-pressed, and smelling faintly of lavender detergent, courtesy of Alma. To his left sat the gallery. It was filled with gray hair and worn jackets. Reuben was there, sitting in the front row, his hands resting on his cane. Next to him were the Smith brothers, old Martha, and a dozen other pilots who had spent their lives hauling cargo through the dark, only to be nearly sold out for scrap. To his right sat the prosecution, led by Officer Yara. And behind the defense table, looking smaller than Fred had ever seen him, sat Cade. Cade did not look up. He stared at his hands, which were clasped tightly on the table. He wore a standard-issue station jumpsuit, the bright orange fabric clashing with his pale, drawn face. "Mr. Archer," the presiding counselor said. She was a stern woman with eyes like flint. "Please describe the events of the morning of the 14th. Fred took a breath. He looked at Jesse, Alma, and Maddie, who were sitting in the front row behind the prosecution. Jesse gave him a sharp nod. Courage. "I took my ship, the Rustwing, out for a diagnostic flight," Fred began. His voice was steady, though his heart hammered against his ribs. "I had previously identified a foreign device installed on my primary flight control linkage. A kill switch." A murmur rippled through the gallery. The older pilots leaned in, their hearing aids buzzing. "I had neutralized the device," Fred continued. but I left it in place to track the activation signal. When I reached the outer marker, the device received a command to lock my flight controls and force the ship into a spin. "And the source of this signal?" the counselor asked. "The source was Dispatch Console 4, Fred said, looking directly at Cade. "Operated by Cade Miller." Cade flinched his shoulders, hunching up as if anticipating a blow. "I see," the counselor said. She turned to the technical bench. "We will now hear the forensic evidence." Maddie stood up. She did not look like a lawyer or a polished expert witness. She looked like a mechanic who had been dragged into court, her utility belt still strapped around her waist. She walked to the holographic projector in the center of the room. "If it pleases the council," Maddie said, her voice bright and clear. "And even if it does not, here is the math." She tapped her datapad. A massive three-dimensional projection of the Rustwing's telemetry appeared in the air. A bright red line traced the path of the signal. "At 0615 hours, Maddie explained, pointing at the jagged spike in the data. An encrypted packet was sent to the device. We stripped the encryption. It is a standard override code used by the Shadow Syndicate for asset denial. Basically, it tells the ship to commit suicide." She swiped the air, and a new graphic appeared. It was a complex web of IP addresses. "We traced the handshake back through the station relays," Maddie continued. "The user credentials were valid, Cade Miller. But more importantly, we captured the audio from the secured channel." She pressed a button. Cade's voice filled the hall, distorted by panic, but undeniable. I can't do it. The valve stuck." Then, the other voice, cold and synthetic. "Then crash him. Guide him into the shear." The silence in the hall was absolute. Reuben lowered his head. Old Martha gasped, covering her mouth with a handkerchief. "This was not a malfunction," Maddie concluded, deactivating the hologram. "It was an assassination attempt via remote control." Maddie sat down. Alma stood up next. She carried a stack of physical papers, handling them with the reverence of a librarian. "Technical murder is one thing," Alma said softly, her voice carrying to the back of the room without effort. "But the trap was laid long before the ship took off." She placed the papers on the evidence scanner. They appeared on the main screen for all to see. "These are conditional asset liquidation forms," Alma explained. "They are designed to be complex. Paragraph 42, subsection C. It authorizes the transfer of all pension funds and physical assets to a designated proxy in the event of accidental death." She zoomed in on the signature line. "This is Fred Archer's signature," Alma said. "And this is Reuben's. And this is Martha's. But if you look at the biometric metadata," she tapped the screen. The signatures flashed red. "They are identical pixel-for-pixel matches to signatures on file from routine safety inspections 3 years ago. No human signs their name exactly the same way twice. These were copied and pasted." Alma turned to face the council. "This is not just theft. This is the systemic weaponization of trust. Cade Miller used his position as a helper to legally prepare these pilots for slaughter. He turned their death into a payday." The counselor looked at Cade. Her expression was one of profound disgust. "Mr. Miller," she said, "do you have anything to say in your defense?" Cade stood up slowly. His lawyer, a public defender, who looked like he wanted to be anywhere else, tried to whisper something to him, but Cade shook his head. Cade walked to the center of the room. He looked at the council. Then he turned and looked at the gallery. He looked at Reuben. He looked at Fred. "I have no defense," Cade said. His voice was hoarse. He took a deep breath, and for the first time in months, he stood straight. "Everything they said is true. I installed the box. I forged the papers. I took the money from the syndicate." "Why?" Reuben asked from the gallery. It wasn't a shout. It was a heartbroken question. "Because I was weak," Cade answered, tears finally spilling over. "Because I wanted to be a big shot, and when I failed, I was too terrified to admit it. I let them convince me that you had all lived long enough, that trading your remaining years for my future was a fair exchange." He looked at Fred. "I was wrong," Cade whispered. "I was so wrong. I am sorry. I know that word is worthless now, but I am willing to do whatever is necessary to make it right. I have given Officer Yara the names. I have given her the server codes for the loan sharks. I will testify against them." He turned back to the council. "I request that my sentence include mandatory communication with the victims," Cade said. "I want to write to them. I want to explain to every single person on that list exactly how I tricked them, so they never let anyone do it to them again." The counselor nodded slowly. "The tribunal notes your confession and your cooperation." The gavel fell 2 hours later. Cade was sentenced to 15 years in a rehabilitation colony on the mining moon of Ethelgard. It was a harsh environment, but not a death sentence. The first 5 years were mandatory labor. The remaining 10 were educational service. He would be teaching financial literacy and fraud prevention to new colonists. Fred stood in the corridor outside the courtroom as the guards led Cade away. Cade stopped when he saw Fred. "Fred," Cade said. Fred looked at him. The anger was still there, a hot coal in his chest, but the hate was gone. 15 years, Fred said. "I got off easy," Cade replied, considering. "You did," Fred agreed. "Do the work, Cade. Actually do the work." "I will," Cade promised. "I will write." "I might not read them," Fred said honestly. "Not for a long time." "That is fair," Cade nodded. He looked at the floor. "Goodbye, Dad." "Goodbye, Cade," Fred said. He watched until the transport doors closed, taking the boy he had raised away to a prison he had earned. "Mr. Archer." A moment. Officer Yara stepped out of a side office. She beckoned him inside. Fred followed her. The room was small and soundproofed. Jesse, Alma, and Maddie were already there, standing by a table covered in old file boxes. "Is this about the syndicate bust?" Fred asked. "I heard you rounded up the local brokers." "We did," Yara said. "Thanks to Cade's intel and Maddie's tracking, we dismantled the Kestrel cell this morning. But that is not why you are here." Yara picked up a dusty, yellowed folder. She placed it on the table. "When you described the kill switch," Yara said, "something triggered a memory in one of our retired forensic techs. He worked the crash investigation desk 10 years ago." Fred felt a chill that had nothing to do with the room's temperature. 10 years ago, Fred whispered. "Barnaby." "We pulled the cold case file," Yara said. She opened the folder. Inside were grainy photos of twisted metal debris fields and engine components. She pointed to a photo of a small blackened component found fused to the primary manifold of Barnaby's ship. "The report at the time listed this as unidentified slag," Yara said. "But Maddie ran a spectral analysis on the image." Maddie stepped forward. She looked serious, her usual grin replaced by a grim tightness. "It is the same tech, Fred," Maddie said. "It is an older model, clunky and analog, but the architecture is identical. It is a throttle limiter with a remote trigger." Fred stared at the photo. The room seemed to stretch and warp. "You mean?" Fred's voice trembled. "It wasn't me." "You pushed the engine, yes," Yara said. "But the engine was designed to take that stress for at least 30 seconds longer. The logs from back then showed a sudden, unexplained drop in coolant pressure, followed by a lock on the flight stick." "The kill switch locked the stick," Fred realized. "Just like it tried to lock mine." "Someone bet against Barnaby," Jessie said, her voice low and furious. "Just like Cade bet against you. Someone took out an insurance policy on that flight and made sure the dice rolled their way." Fred grabbed the edge of the table. His knees felt like water. For 10 years. For 10 years he had woken up every morning and looked at the crack in his ship and told himself he was a murderer. He had lived a half-life grounding himself, punishing himself, believing that his arrogance had killed his best friend. But he had been a pawn. Barnaby had been a payout. "Who?" Fred asked. The word was a growl. "The broker who ordered it died 5 years ago," Yara said gently. "A bar fight in the lower levels. Justice of a sort." Fred closed his eyes. He felt a tear slide down his cheek, hot and stinging. "I carried it," Fred whispered. "I carried it for so long." "Put it down, Fred," Alma said. She walked over and placed her hand on his back. "It is heavy and it is not yours to carry anymore." Fred let out a sob. It was a raw, ugly sound, the sound of a dam breaking. He cried for Barnaby. He cried for Cade. He cried for the 10 years of sunlight he had denied himself. Jesse and Maddie moved in surrounding him. The four of them stood in the small office, a tight knot of grief and relief. "It wasn't my fault," Fred said, saying the words for the first time. "It wasn't my fault." 6 months later. The Rustwing looked magnificent. She had been scrubbed, polished, and repainted. The dull rust color was gone, replaced by a sleek, matte gunmetal finish, with accents of deep crimson, the color of the Vulpiri warrior caste. But the most important change was in the cockpit. Fred stood on the gantry, looking through the open canopy. The crack in the frame was gone. Maddie had filled it with a gold-infused resin. It wasn't hidden, it was highlighted. A jagged line of gold running through the metal, a technique she called kintsugi, repairing the broken to make it more beautiful than the new. "Stop staring at the ship, you narcissist," Maddie yelled from the deck below. She was wearing a dress that seemed to be made entirely of fiber optic cables that changed color with her mood. Currently, they were a frantic, happy pink. "The guests are waiting," Fred adjusted his collar. He was wearing a formal tunic, a blend of human tailoring and Vulpiri silk. He looked distinguished. He looked happy. He climbed down the ladder. The hangar bay had been transformed. Banners of silk hung from the rafters, softening the industrial edges. Tables were laden with food, roast meats for the Vulpiri pastries, for the humans, and a massive barrel of Reuben's homemade moonshine. Reuben stood at the front, leaning on his cane, beaming. He had been elected the officiant for the human portion of the ceremony. Fred walked down the aisle. The pilots of Kestrel Spindle cheered. The Smith brothers were crying. Old Martha was throwing rice. At the altar, Jessie waited. She looked breathtaking. She wore a ceremonial gown of white leather and silver chainmail, a perfect fusion of bride and warrior. Her red fur was groomed to a shine, and her golden eyes were soft with an emotion that Fred now knew was love. Beside her stood Alma, the maid of honor, holding a bouquet of rare herbs. "Ready to fly?" Jessie asked as Fred took her hand. "Flight plan filed," Fred smiled. "No turning back." Reuben cleared his throat. "We are gathered here today to join two species, two hearts, and two very stubborn pilots." The crowd chuckled. "Fred Archer," Reuben said. "Do you take this warrior to be your co-pilot, to check her 6, to share your air and your fuel in clear skies and in storms?" "I do," Fred said, slipping a ring of simple titanium onto Jessie's finger. Then, it was the Vulpiri turn. Alma stepped forward with a pot of ceremonial paint, a vibrant, glowing blue. "The bond is not just spoken," Alma said. "It is marked." Jessie extended her tail. It was long, bushy, and magnificent. She wrapped it slowly, deliberately around Fred's left wrist, tightening it in a firm embrace. Fred dipped his hand into the paint. With trembling fingers, he drew the symbol of the archer, a stylized arrow, onto the armor plate over Jessie's heart. Then, Jessie took the paint. She drew the symbol of the ember tail of flame on Fred's chest. "With this mark," Jessie said, her voice ringing out, "I claim you. Your battles are my battles. Your peace is my peace." "And your ship is my ship," Maddie shouted from the side, holding a video camera. "Legally speaking." "Ignore her," Jessie whispered, leaning in. "I pronounce you bonded," Reuben shouted. "Kiss the bride." Fred kissed her. It was a kiss that tasted of tea and ozone and the future. The crowd erupted. Maddie set off a confetti cannon that she had definitely overloaded, burying the front row in a blizzard of glitter. After the ceremony, they moved to the Rustwing. It was tradition. The ship had to be blessed. Fred and Jesse took brushes. Together on the nose of the ship right below the cockpit, they painted a new emblem. It was a fox curling around a wrench. "To the Rust Wing," Fred toasted, raising a glass. "To the Rust Wing," the crowd roared. As the party raged on, Fred found a quiet moment. He stood by the open hangar door, looking out at the gas giant. The storms were still there, churning in the deep blue. But they didn't look like a threat anymore. They just looked like weather. He felt a hand on his back. "Jessie." "Regrets?" she asked. "Only that I didn't accept that friend request sooner," Fred said. 5 years later. The workshop was loud. Louder than it had ever been. Dad, look, I made the rotor spin." A small boy, no older than 4, came running up to Fred. He had Fred's messy brown hair, but sticking out of that hair were 2 fuzzy, triangular fox ears that twitched with excitement. He also had a small bushy tail that was currently wagging so hard it was vibrating. "Let me see Leo," Fred said, picking the boy up. Leo held up a small electric motor. It was wired clumsily to a battery, but it was spinning. "That is excellent wiring, kiddo," Fred said. "Maddie taught you the bridge connection." "Auntie Maddie said if I cross the wires it goes boom," Leo giggled. "She is not wrong," Fred laughed. Behind him, another child, a girl with Jessie's red hair and Fred's human ears, was chasing a drone that Maddie was piloting around the ceiling. The workshop had changed. The consulting corner was now a permanent fixture. A neon sign hung over a clean desk in the corner. "Archer Associates, Pilot Advocacy." Reuben sat at the desk. He was very old now, frail as parchment, but his mind was sharp. He was explaining a contract to a young, terrified cargo pilot. "You see this line here, son?" Reuben poked the paper. "This says they can deduct fuel costs from your pay. You tell them to shove that where the sun doesn't shine. Standard station law says fuel is the employer's dime." The young pilot nodded frantically, taking notes. Fred smiled. The Committee for Elder Pilot Protection was in full swing. They had saved 50 pilots from predatory loans in the last year alone. Jessie walked in from the flight deck. She was wearing an instructor's uniform. She ran the Ember Flight Academy, now a school that taught young pilots that safety checks were not for wimps, and that knowing when not to fly was the bravest decision a pilot could make. She walked over to Fred and kissed him on the cheek. "Mail call," she said, handing him a small packet. Fred looked at the return address. Ethelgard Rehabilitation Colony. It was from Cade. Fred walked over to the Rust Wing, which was parked in its usual spot. He sat on the landing strut and opened the letter. "Dear Fred, I taught a class today on compound interest. I saw the light bulb go on in a kid's head, a kid who reminded me of myself at 20. He was going to sign a loan for a racer. After my class, he tore up the contract. I think I saved him. It feels better than flying. I have 5 years left. I am not asking for a spot in the hangar. I know I lost that. But I hope maybe I can buy you a coffee one day. Just a coffee. Your friend Cade." Fred folded the letter. He didn't tear it up. He placed it in a small metal box welded to the Rust Wing's frame. The box was half full of letters. "Maybe," Fred whispered. "One day." He stood up. The station intercom chimed. "Attention all hands. Sector 7 storm warning lifted. Commercial traffic may resume." Fred's datapad pinged. He pulled it out. It was a notification from DocLink. "New friend request from Skywalker Jr. Message. Hello, I am a student at the Ember Academy. Instructor Jesse says you are the only mechanic who can listen to an engine without a scanner. Is that true? I want to learn." Fred looked at the message. He looked at his chaotic, noisy, beautiful workshop. He looked at his wife teaching their daughter how to hold a wrench. He looked at Maddie electrocuting herself mildly and laughing. He looked at Alma brewing tea for Reuben. He looked at the golden scar on his ship. He tapped the screen. Accept. "Leo," Fred called out. "Come here. I want to show you how to listen to the machine." The boy ran over his fox ears, perking up. Does it talk? Leo asked. It sings, Fred said, placing his hand on the hull. You just have to be quiet enough to hear it. Outside the thick glass of the viewport, the great blue planet of Kestrel Spindle turned slowly in the void. It was a cold, hard universe out there, but in Hangar Bay 4 it was warm, and the engine hummed a song of home, the end.